Good morning once again, everybody. So, new background, things are a bit different, of course, trying to maintain a bit of calmness in light of how stormy the waters are ahead of us is kind of difficult, especially when I'm covering a lot of subjects that are, well, even though I didn't want to get into politics, increasingly it's kind of unavoidable. Political side of things, the economic side of things, and what direction we really have to go in order to get some solid ground under our feet. Okay, so as you see, shiny new background with a cat, a nice orange cat, the ones that always get into the most trouble. Anyway, let's get into today's subject. We are going to talk about the fact that America is effectively dead in the water. Now, a lot of people, especially, it's not exactly looked highly upon to talk about the reality of the circumstances, but it is what it is. Now, I say this next part in knowing that, of course, we do have the shit show in Sandland going on right now, but here's the reality. We cannot actually afford to be fighting any kind of protracted war. We don't have the capabilities, all right? Now, DJT, when he was getting in, a large part of the push was, or at least the expectation, was that we would throw off the position as the reserve currency, which we are still absolutely doing a fantastic job at getting other countries to not want to work with us anymore. But we would throw off the reserve status and we would start firing up manufacturing in the US again. Now, that being said, there are companies that are leaving the European Union in order to come to the US because the circumstances in the EU are so bad that even national pride factories, all right, are leaving. All right. Like, for instance, Volkswagen is going to be leaving Germany to start manufacturing in America. Now, in terms of the companies that have, promised to do manufacturing in the United States, they're one of the few that are actually going to come through because in terms of oil, in terms of energy, Germany is a fucking disaster. Okay. Now, it's not as bad as Australia is right now, but regardless, we don't have the industrial capacity to pull off a long, protracted state of warfare. We don't have the economy to do it. We don't have the resources to do it. And if you want to send the entirety of the country back to the 1900s, yeah, you might be able to pull it off, but good God, you'd go from a yearly, hold on, what is the yearly activity? It's somewhere around, I want to say 12 to 17. US yearly. Uh, oh, oh my. Nominal GDP estimated to be 30 to. Wow. Okay. All right. That's interesting. Damn. That's impressive. Unfortunately, all those dollars are worth less, so if you account for inflation, it's probably much lower. Anyway, $30 trillion economy. Okay. Now, when you take into account that the majority of the GDP is broken window and that broken window fallacy in rich people, that explains that pretty quickly. Also, the mistakes economy, the fact that it's not just the broken window fallacy, but the next layer, the next chunk to that onion is the fact that we're spending a fortune replacing shit that should have lasted 2, 3, 4, 5 times longer, and we're doing it at full market price. Just like the AC units, the refrigerators, the honestly, it's kind of hard to make a garbage chest freezer, but just general daily appliances, the cars, they should last 20 plus years. What they end up lasting is like 5 years with regular use. All right. Anyway, let's get back to the point. The politicians and the corporates have spent the last 50 years undermining, strip mining, and sacrificing our economy, our people, and our industry. We've got nothing left but scammers, the indebted, the sick and the old, and the mentally ill. These are the people we have left in this country, the people who either refused to participate and started, scamming. And then you have, of course, the old timers who have already, done their tour through industrial, essentially protracted wartime economics. Whether people want to see it for what it is or not, you have the people who are massively in debt, mostly because the participation cost and keeping up with the Joneses. Now, keeping up with the Joneses, of course, you can't look past that. All right. It's stupid to try to maintain these appearances of wealth if you were in the middle class, because here's the reality: the people in the gated neighborhoods are they themselves are a few payments away from bankruptcy. All right, they are one shit month away from having their entire lives flipped upside down. All right. And it can come from any direction because they have more and more exposure to more and more parts of the economy going bad. All right. If the car market tanks, if their investments drop, if the bond market blows up, they are, as you climb up the ranks, you have more and more exposure to different parts and sectors of the economy. All right. It's part of the reason why when it comes to, and this is not financial advice, of course, but it's part of the reason why there was always that massive push to diversify, to constantly spread it out. So if you were heavily invested in housing, you don't lose everything if the housing market implodes. That'll never happen. Oh, yes, the fuck it will. Yes, it will. All right. Because once again, from 2008 to now, the only thing that's changed is instead of a mortgage market blowing up, instead of the credit markets blowing up, you have more. Well, you could still blow up the credit markets pretty easily, especially the private credit, the shadow lending. But the bigger issue is because the sovereigns, because the national governments took the weight from all of that, the next in line is the sovereign governments collapsing from their debts, which would literally collapse everything else with it. All right, because then there goes your guarantees, there goes all your backstops. All right, and the reality is, not even the Fed puts, the Fed backstops are worth a damn anymore. All right, the reality is, fundamentally, you can't print value, and when it comes to trying to backstop and prop all of this up, given I'm not exactly the biggest fan of capitalism, especially what we've seen from it. But but if you follow the traditional pattern, if you refuse to let markets adjust as they're supposed to, whenever you get a bubble, whenever things get frothy, all right, you end up with compounding issues going into multiple orders of effect that becomes harder and harder to keep track of it. All right. And then you have what we have now where not letting the housing market collapse and reset, not letting all of these other industries and areas face their natural demise and restart because they prevented that. All right. Now there are financial ties from all of these gigantic, monstrous, failing enterprises, these failing sectors of the economy that are financially tied in because when you run out of room to grow, when you can't produce anymore, when you can't raise your prices, when you can't find any other path to additional profitability, you have to move into the banking system. You have to move into the markets. You need to start playing stocks. So if you are, XYZ company, you're buying up your competition. You're trying to do mergers. You're trying to grab more and more market share by domination. And your financial interests start to spread out everywhere. So, literally, we're at the point now where because everything is so interconnected in terms of actual physical, footprint, all right, and in terms of the financial layouts, literally anything goes wrong, it triggers a chain of events throughout every single industry in the country. All right. If the banking system started to freeze up, if lending stopped for a little bit, all right. If people, if the credit card market, if all of the credit card debt went gone, all right, donezo, nobody's ever paying that back, and all of that credit collapses, that's going to affect every single one of these companies because they're tied in somehow, some way. All right. And that's not even getting into the derivatives nightmare and all the betting, which of course is over $250 billion. So, good God, if anything happens to derivatives, it puts us into a turbo depression. All right. And this is a side note, too. Everything, the only thing that allows this system to survive is the fact that one, people will keep working, two, people still have needs. Three, well, everything is insured. Okay. As long as the insurance is in place and as long as there are backstops to the insurers, we can continue to pretend that everybody can be a winner. All right. Versus, which this is an important part to the situation as well. They've tried to engineer a system where nobody loses. All right. At least officially, nobody loses. The problem is with that, you can't honestly win without somebody else losing. The way that the economy works in terms of the actual existence and the actual productivity, the actual production, somebody wins, somebody loses. Now, you can have insurance policies everywhere for everything to try to make up for the fact that if you are losing in a sector, that you will never actually have to eat the consequences of it. But that just comes from more and more support from everywhere else. All right. So effectively, the winners are paying into insurance, the losers are paying into insurance, and the winners are continuously having to prop up whoever they're beating in any specific sector because it's all interconnected. It's a mess. Back to the point again. All right. I'm sorry I keep getting, thrown off track, but there's so many things to talk about, so many interconnections. It's nearly impossible to take all of this data and get it into one solid view. All right, like it's beyond normal human comprehension. All right, just how messy and dirty and filthy the system honestly is. Back to the point, we have no sane people left, especially the willing and capable and qualified people. We don't have these people left, all right? Most people have checked out, all right? We have nearly no ability to produce weaponry and ammunition to support and maintain a massive war effort. Now, regardless of what Pete will do when he goes to the weapons manufacturers and tells them, all right, 10x production, 100x production, these companies that produce all of the war materials, not only, so you have the issue of the fact that, and this is true for literally every single American corporation, in order to play in China's sandbox, Because every Chinese factory is essentially has a political commissar. Part of playing in the Chinese sandbox is if you are going to have anything manufactured in China, they get the schematics, they get the blueprints, they get the intellectual property. People wonder, all right, why the hell were the Chinese able to make a near perfect knockoff of the Black Hawk and our most expensive stealth fighter that took ages and over $1 trillion to develop? How in the hell are they producing a clone? All right, how are they able to do this? It's because American corporations are essentially the back door for the Chinese Communist Party. All right, they, hmm, by necessity or by the ease to scrape more profit out of the deal, so much production happens in China. So many parts are made in China that it is literally impossible for these companies to not end up handing information over to the Chinese. Okay? So they've got everything, every secret weapon. All right, maybe not every secret weapon, but most, because outside of the fact that you have to hand over the intellectual property, schematics, blueprints, all of that to the CCP, all right, through those political commissars, you also have the reality that with all of the immigration that we've had in the US, okay, of course, part of the wave of immigrants also created the perfect espionage opportunity. So you have people who have been, it could be first gen, it could be second gen, but you've got people who are secretly handing information over to the Chinese. All right. Just like a perfect example, when the USSR fell, there was a massive amount of Soviet trained agents in the United States. What ended up happening, and I forget the company's name, but what ended up happening is when the USSR fell, they just created their own political consultancy. And they have a building in DC, I believe in DC. I don't know, it's been a while since I actually researched them. Anyway, and they just started working with the US government. Now, do they still have ties to the Russian government? Who knows? Who knows? But, and I'm not going to say, but there's been so much espionage and there are so many plants, and not only the fact that you have to hand over the schematics, but the fact that you have people in the United States handing over very highly classified information to foreign nations. Things are not good. All right. Like in terms of selling out, the entirety of the United States has sold out. It's at the corporate level, it's at the level of the generations. Of course, most people realize that the boomers, in search of their grand investment strategy, have literally sold out the country and the generations after them so they can, take their Viking cruises and have a blast. Meanwhile, they're firing up the war machine again because the country is unsurprisingly in a really bad position. All right. We've essentially, as a nation, we're essentially a whore to the world. All right. Anyway, good God, I'm just throwing off point left and right. Currently, currently, factories that were producing things like primers are down. All right, so a large amount of ammunition, like ammunition production, stopped late last year. Okay, so whatever's left until those factories are running again and until the raw materials are coming back in again, we actually don't have a massive amount of uh, our capabilities are limited. Okay. And even all of these companies, outside of the fact that they handed over all of the intellectual property to foreign nations, we also have to deal with the fact that all of these companies, all of these major defense contractors, these companies, they're all about the money. They don't give a shit about, political affiliations or doing what's right for the country. No, they're in it for the money. All right, they could have been making tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions and more, bullets, bombs, everything, literally everything. But they do 1/10 of it, and they're getting 10x the base market price, because part of the deal with the defense industries and our own, God, I'm forgetting words, and the Department of Defense, the military industrial complex, is they pay 5 to 10 times more per item as essentially a kickback, a direct kickback, in order to ensure that these factories stay open, that these plants keep running. So they're paying through the nose for 1/10 of what they should be getting. These factories, the executives for these companies, there's no interest, there is no willingness to actually start mass production. Like, the reality is, the aims of the current administration, we'll say, whatever their aims honestly are, the financial incentive is there to do everything possible to work against them quietly. Okay? These companies have no interest in spinning up production. They don't want to actually, they don't want to give up the massive amount of money that they're making, because essentially what they're being asked to do is put profit in the background and start actually mass manufacturing. Now, the war with Ukraine, Russian industry has been spun up in order to support the war. All right. So they can mass produce the 155 artillery shells that we've run out of. They can mass produce all of the shit that they need, and they have the raw materials to do it. All right. They may not have the most stable economy, but they can actually run and maintain a war economy. The reality is, if we want to go hoi for with it, all right, if we want to go strategically with it, the United States needs a period of over 10 years of very focused autarky before it can honestly be in a position again to maintain large scale operations for a sustained period of time. Okay. Anyway, once again, back to the point. We can't even maintain our own country currently. The infrastructure is still falling apart. It has been for a while. The parts to keep our logistics systems going are low quality and often defective, and this is also part of fifth generation warfare. We still get most of the parts. You look at the automakers, they're buying parts from foreign production. All right. There is very much the incentive for the Chinas, the Vietnams, wherever the hell they're getting the parts from. There's very much the incentive, especially Chinese sphere of influence. There's very much the incentive to intentionally send defective parts to the US, so we can't keep the semis running, we can't keep the trains running, we can't keep the planes in the air, we can't keep the cars running. Why? Less resources move around, you're jamming up production, you're stalling the workforce, you're lowering the productive capacity of every single facet of the American economy the more low quality parts that you put out. This puts an additional strain on it. All right. And then tie with it, the lack of productivity creates higher prices and you get worse inflation from it. Okay. we're burning all of our remaining energy pretending and messaging as if our overall economy isn't in free fall and our people are doing just fine and dandy. All right. There is, because this is the thing, it's gaslighting, it's consistent. Best economy ever. Nothing's ever, I can't do his voice, but best economy ever. Everything's going to be great. Prices are going down. Prices are indeed starting to go down in some areas, but that's only because the demand crashed. Okay. Because AI has wiped out so many jobs, we're kind of in that position now where you've got whatever goods are left chasing whatever dollars in a shrinking pool are still available and out there to spend. All right. People pulled back their spending last year. All right. Even the year before. It's been a slow process, but there's less money circulating. Well, more people are willing to give less and less and less and less and less over time. All right. It's the thing, chips are nice, but if you have a choice between, eating a bag of whatever, all right, versus being able to, make your own DIY pizza and be, run on that for the whole day, all right, you gotta pick your battles, all right, you gotta make your choice. Do you want to actually sustain yourself, or do you want to splurge on junk food that isn't going to do anything for you? All right. It's part of the reason why people are becoming a lot more, or at least trying to become a lot more healthy now, because the reality is, even if people can't necessarily put it into words, the reality is they feel the changes that are happening. All right. And their bodies, their whole genetic structure, all right, is going into the epigenetic lineage and feeling the same patterns repeat of what happened the last time everything went tits up. Okay. Internally, they feel kind of unwell and unsure, and everything's kind of falling out of balance because in the past, these same kind of things happened before the Great Depression kicked off. All right, things stop moving, jobs start drying up, the money is may start going farther, but it's not because things are going well. Once again, Keynesian economics cannot handle deflation. Okay. And this is where, we get into crack up boom territory. All right. Because once enough, because it takes forever for the, Fed or the government and Treasury to actually move on anything. Once they realize that large parts of the economy are tipping into deflation. Even though they might message that they don't want any more inflation, you can't have a deflation without blowing up the economy. Okay? So, once enough of the numbers start to come out, the Fed's going to end up cutting the interest rates. The government's going to end up with the Treasury and the Fed combined. They are going to just pump money nonstop. They're going to trigger a gigantic inflationary wave because there's no other way to prop up the prices. There's no other way to prop up the production. Okay? And it's baked into the cake. The fact that the billionaires have so much wealth and so much power and so much ownership over the system. The reality is when you have that much wealth concentration, there is no this has been a persistent thing ever since 2008. Money velocity cratered. Okay, there's very little actual money that circulates in the U.S. economy. It's nothing, and it has to circulate fast enough. All right, it's got to circulate fast enough in order to sustain the needs and some of the wants for all of the population. At one point in time, the total amount of money in circulation within the United States proper was, I think, 600 billion. All right. Now, when the government back then was pushing trillion-dollar bailout plans and packages and handing people money, at no point did they really focus on the fact that 600 billion for a while was decent, all right? That propped up just about everything you needed, all right? But the reality is, now that jobs are drying up because of the AI, because of the massive push to just replace everybody possible, money velocity is probably going through the floor at this point, all right? Which just spells absolute disaster, long term, medium term, long term. But when you look at things for what they are, regardless of the gaslighting, regardless of the media pretending that things are actually doing just fine, that everything's okay, the country in reality is in a state of catastrophe. And this isn't just the US, this is Europe. All right, this is the US, this is Europe, this is Canada, Mexico, most of South America, this is Australia, this is literally all of the quote unquote, allied countries. All right, Western allied countries or Western sphere of influence. It's an economic catastrophe. All right. Every promise that they've made is proving to be a lie. I think it was the Treasury, literally just spilled the beans that okay, well, currently we have like 138 trillion in debt. That's just the first half of the 250 trillion plus of long-term liabilities. Once again, I said this in a previous video, but it's worth reiterating. They don't know how much they actually are going to owe in long-term liabilities until the people, start filling out the paperwork to collect them. They don't know how much they actually are going to owe in Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of these programs until the bill comes due. Okay? So they have 138 trillion currently. All right, currently. There's another 120, 12 at least to go. All right, unless people start, dropping dead left and right and can't collect on benefits. But regardless of that, 250 trillion of off the books liabilities just on the federal side alone. That doesn't take into account the state pensions and any debts connected to the states. That doesn't take into account the local debts, all right, when it comes to the schools, when it comes to local pensions, all right, any kind of local benefits of any kind, all right. The federal government just on its own physical side is fucked, all right. So all the promises are proving to be lies, and the future has not only been offshored, but increasingly it's been outsourced. The West is, there's no other way to say it, the West is fucked. Okay? The only thing, because you can't, again, I said this in the previous video as well, the only thing that you can honestly do at this point is mass automate the economy, switch to a resource-based economy, and then the billionaires don't matter anymore. Unless you want to go the totalitarian route, which is not going to end well for anybody. But the reality is, there is no way to make good on the promises without booting human beings out of the value chain. Okay? Booting human beings out of the value chain obviously wipes out people's ability to sell their time for, money. And if they can't sell their time for money, if they can't sell their labor for money, all of a sudden they all fall into the category of no longer economically viable. Spending collapses, which triggers the deflationary spiral down from AI, which leaves us in the position where less and less people, a shrinking pool of people, have spending money as the layoffs spin up because you can't produce enough. The only thing that you can honestly do to try to counteract that is essentially what I warned about, I want to say over a decade ago. All right. Essentially, we get to the position where the only way that the United States can manage to prop itself up is if it industrially destroys damn near every other country on the planet. So we would have to completely incapacitate China, Russia, Europe, even though the Europeans are apparently blind to this, but they're still competitors at the end of the day. Okay? We would have to wipe out the productivity and the industrial output of literally every other country on the planet. And that would be one of the other ways to balance it. All right. This is the thing. When I say that there's no way to balance things, all right, what I really mean is there's no way to balance things nicely. Okay, there's no way to balance things without a lot of drama and a lot of unneeded. How do I put this? Because they updated the algorithm again. Um, mm, we'll just say a lot less humans on the planet. Okay, there's very few actual strategies that you can use to try to bail the United States out of its financial catastrophic future, present and future. There's not too many things that you can do. Anyway, outside of being a terrible downer and ruining people's outlooks into the future, we're gonna end it here. If you like and appreciate the video, like, favorite, sub, share, do all the things, ring the bell, ding the bell, tick the bell, do all the things to your heart's content, the bell. If you are interested in written content, check out the Substack in the description box below. And if you are interested in personal, business, or sovereign consulting, stop by www.spadesconsulting.com without the dash, and I will see you all next time. Have a good one.